Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this motion's a dud. It's a dud for three obvious reasons. It is clearly an attack on Australian workers because the federal government obviously has a preference for foreign ships, foreign crews working our coastline. And we have precious few ships and precious few Australian workers on our coastline at the moment. And if this motion was ultimately to be enacted and become the law of the land, and if the coastal shipping reforms of the previous government were to be overturned, then some of those people would lose their job, and those that remained would have to endure diminished conditions of service. The second issue, Deputy Speaker, is that this is an attack on the rights of workers to organise and to negotiate, because this is clearly an attack at the MUA and also the Australian Institute of Marine and Power Engineers, the two of the key unions that do represent the workers on Australian ships, Australian workers on Australian ships. But I don't want to dwell on those first two issues, how it's an attack on workers and an attack on unions. I want to dwell on what this is really all about, Deputy Speaker. This is all about Bass Strait. This is all about the federal Liberal national government not wanting to do anything to remedy the situation with Bass Strait. And the situation is, Deputy Speaker, that Bass Strait is and remains the most significant break on Tasmanian economic development, and it's the easiest to fix. To give you a sense of how big a problem it is, Deputy Speaker, to get a 20-foot container of some sort of commodity from Hobart to a North American market, it's $500 to get the container to a northern Tasmanian port, another $1,000 to get that container from the north of Tasmania landed in the Port of Melbourne, so we're up to $1,500, Deputy Speaker, but only $500 to get that container from the Port of Melbourne to the North American market. In other words, 3/4 of the cost of shipping a container from Hobart to North America, 3/4 of the cost is getting it from Hobart, landed in the Port of Melbourne. And the majority of that cost is getting it across Bass Strait. So yes, we can tinker around the edges with an international shipping service from Bell Bay that will advantage a small number of Australian producers. Yes, we can commission a productivity commission report. We can tinker around the edges. But frankly, Deputy Speaker, what is needed, and it's quite simple, is an effective subsidy arrangement applying to all people, vehicles and freight in and out of Tasmania across Bass Strait. Now, Deputy Speaker, one of the reasons the broad community treats politicians with complete and utter contempt is because they're sick of all this mudslinging and abuse in places like this. I sat here quietly and I showed respect to the two government speakers. I would ask that they do the same to me, and then maybe the community will treat us with more respect. So what's needed? What is needed, Deputy Speaker, and it's quite simple, is an effective subsidy arrangement on all people, vehicles and freight in and out of the state. Now, that will take leadership. It will take leadership. I understand that the government has an ideological position. It wants to, and in fact, so do I. I want to reduce the cost of business. That's what I want to do as well. But the government also has an opposition towards organised labour and an opposition to the unions. Well, what I ask the government to do is show some really strong leadership here and put the ideological battle off to the side and to act in the public interest. Think about Bloodstone. We've talked a lot about these firms and the difficulties they have to endure. But think about Bloodstone. Makes gumboots in Moona, in my electorate. Think about the fact that 3/4 of the cost of getting those gumboots to their North American markets is just getting it landed in the Port of Melbourne. And deregulating coastal shipping in Australia will do next to nothing to help that company. It will do next to nothing to help that company. And in fact, the government itself has already, with its two speakers, given a number of examples of Tasmanian businesses who are crippled by the high cost of Bass Strait. Well, you're giving the examples yourself, and I've given another example of Bloodstone boots. The fact is that the Strait is a crippling break on our economy, and until we can give effective subsidies to bring it into the line of transporting goods across a similar distance on the mainland, until we get to that point, then Tasmanian businesses will be fundamentally disadvantaged. And remember, if we help the businesses, we help the community. And yes, it might take a little bit more federal money up front to improve the subsidy arrangements, but I tell you what, members of the government, it will save Canberra money in the long run, Because the more we boost the economy, the more we need other handouts from Canberra. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Denham.